Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, Scott Barrett, and there are no guests today. This is a rare solo pod. I don't really like doing podcasts. I don't like doing solo pods, but it's an important topic and I'm excited to dive into it. I poured myself a gigantic glass of whiskey and ginger ale. I don't know how long this is going to take, but it's going to be a nice little intimate evening with yourself, myself, talking about everything you need to know to build a dynasty in Dynasty Fantasy Football. Ideally, this is an evergreen masterclass on how to dominate your dynasty league, to do exactly what the name implies, to build a dynasty in your Dynasty Fantasy Football League. You guys have asked for this for years, asked for me to do a Dynasty Fantasy Football 101. What is it? How do you play it? And a Dynasty 201 is how do you dominate it? And so that's what this is today. Not in article form. I don't have the time right now. In video form, audio form, we have it for you. So without further ado, let's dive into it. Dynasty 101. What is Dynasty Fantasy Football? Basically, what Dynasty Fantasy Football is you have one main draft. You have a startup draft. You keep the same players every year, and then you draft every offseason, but you're only drafting rookies. And so when I first heard what this was, it took me years to get into it. It just didn't seem fun. I have to keep these players forever. Like I'll make some bad picks, like I drafted Kadarius Toney in a bunch of leagues last year. And like by week 2, even I was sick of him and just wanted to cut him from every one of my leagues. And like, I can't imagine having him for forever. This didn't sound like fun, but let me tell you, it is so much fun. It is the most fun. My best league, my favorite league, the DFB Invitational. Matthew Berry's in that, Rich Rebar, Pat Thorman, a bunch of DFS pros, a bunch of Dynasty pros, a bunch of redraft pros are in that. That is my most fun league by far. Probably Dynasty more fun than redraft on average by a margin. Way easier to win. My ROI on Dynasty is probably number 1 of any fantasy format. It's a blast. I think you're just going to have to take my word for it. But like one of the key differences between redraft and dynasty, if you're not used to it. So Devontae Adams is a round 2 pick in redraft, but he's going round 6 or round 7 in dynasty. Why is that? It's because, well, ideally your dynasty league lasts for forever. So you want players who are in your startup who are both young and good. All of these players go earliest in the draft. And then you're forced with a trade-off between good but old and young but probably not good players later in your draft. But because theoretically your league lasts forever, you own these players forever, you ideally want young, good players. And that's kind of how you see startup ADP shakeout. So we're going to touch on my preferred strategies a little bit later. But first, I want to talk about my ideal league settings. So if you're starting a dynasty league and you're the commissioner, what league settings should you go with? I am going to advocate for, and I'm in, I don't know, it feels like 30, maybe let's say err on the side of caution, 15 dynasty leagues. And the vast majority of those are, because I lobby for these, are super flex, tight end premium, deep rosters, and then the rookie draft before the startup draft. Super flex, what is that? Basically 2 quarterback league. It's where you can start a running back, wide receiver, tight end, or quarterback in the flex spot. But because quarterbacks score more points, you're probably just starting a quarterback there, or you're trying to, or you should. Tight end premium is just all positions get 1 point for every reception. Tight ends get 1.5 points. I like that. I think that's way more fun, way more competitive. Deep rosters, I love that. I just think, well, for one thing, that's one of my biggest edges is just, I know depth charts and rosters better than anyone else. And the rookie draft before the startup draft, again, it's the same thing. I just have a massive edge there. Just, you see, I wrote half the length of the catcher in the rye by word count between my various rookie model articles. Most people drafting before the draft don't really know these rookies as well as I do, but more than that, is just fun. It's just so much fun to be like rooting for Jonathan Brooks to be the first running back drafted and to go to a good landing spot because you have so much exposure to him already. So I really recommend that, especially if you're a fantasy point sub. I think, no one in the industry outside of, like Dane Brugler maybe, but has a better grasp on the rookies, a better hit rate on rookie rankings pre-draft versus post-draft than I do. So definitely recommend that to all Fantasy Points subscribers. But real quick, today's show is sponsored by FFPC. That's myffpc.com. You dominate your home, office, and family leagues every year. Now it's time to take your game to the next level. The FFPC is the place to play fantasy football this summer. No salary caps, no DFS, no new formats to learn, just the pure drafting fun that you've always loved. FFPC is home to multiple $1 million grand prizes, massive best ball tournaments, competitive dynasty leagues, and a multitude of exclusive formats. Drafts are filling every single day at myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com. And they're our sponsor. Before they became our sponsor, this has long been my preferred destination for all high stakes redraft leagues and for dynasty leagues with, by the way, near zero risk of folding, which is the most important thing. When I talked to the folks over at FFPC a year ago, I assume this is still the case, but in all their years of doing dynasty leagues, I think it's like 10 plus, they've never once had a league fold. So highly recommend them. Also, highly recommend doing their Triflex drafts, which is exactly how, or nearly exactly how I'd set up my own leagues. That's super flex, 2 running backs, 3 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 2 flex, tight end premium. And so use promo code POINTS, POINTS, for a $25 off discount. We'll also have the referral link in the YouTube or podcast description. Again, that's myffpc.com, and that's promo code POINTS. Okay, now that you have a introductory level understanding of the game, let's go deep into the weeds, which is what I imagine the bulk of the viewers want here, the bulk of our subscribers want. My preferred strategies. And this is going to be a very long monologue. When I first got into Dynasty, the popular strategy at the time was to go all in on trying to win now. The main cheerleader of this strategy at this time was Jacob Rickroad, personal friend of the show, at Clutch Fantasy on Twitter. Basically, you treat Dynasty like a redraft league. You don't not worry about age, but you worry about age less than anyone else. You sell your rookie picks because ideally you're picking last in your rookie draft every year, which, by the way, is the punishment for winning the league. Your rookie draft is in the reverse order of standings. You have the startup draft, which occurs only once ever. And then every year you have the rookie draft where you only draft rookies. And whoever wins the league picks last. Whoever finishes dead last picks first. So ideally, you win your league, you're picking last. So it's worth less, but you traded it when your trade partner valued it as basically a 106, which is what people typically do when in a startup trading rookie picks. And according to Jacob, rookie picks are basically lottery tickets with a super high bust risk, while older veterans are more proven commodities. If you do this right, you can win 2 of the first 3 years, let's say. And then when the wheels start to fall off, you just start your rebuild. But guess what? If you won in 2 of the first 3 years, you just had your buy-in paid for the next 21 years. You get out of that rebuild and it go poorly for quite some time. You're still way massively up. And then you win again, you're even more up. I followed this strategy in my first ever Dynasty League. It's called the Lemon League. And so I didn't know anything about Dynasty. I took Jacob's advice. I went win now. They took the opposite approach. What happened? I came very close to winning year 1, but I didn't set my lineup in the playoffs. My dad was in the hospital, but then I won year 2 and I'm like, all right, I'm way up. I have 10 years of buy-ins paid for. Right. And then after year 2, my lineup just got progressively worse and worse. Years 3 and 6, I was painfully middle of the pack. And now I think year 7, it's just dead. Oh my God. It is so dead. And it is multiple years away from being competitive, while TJ has an insane juggernaut roster. Curtis has an insane juggernaut roster. It's almost totally destroyed it has totally destroyed the competitive nature of this league, where really no one has a chance of winning outside of those two. But we have a lively group chat, so it's really just going to exist for forever. And so after my experience, after year 3, I guess, where I saw where my league was trending relative to Curtis and TJ, I took TJ on as a co-owner. I adopted I'm like, hey, I want you to co-manage these leagues with me. I want you to teach me everything I know. And I adopted his strategy. Basically, more or less the opposite of Jacob Rick Rhodes' philosophy. My goal with this strategy, TJ's strategy, was, like the name of the game suggests, to build a dynasty, to build a super team that definitely doesn't win year 1, probably finishes dead last year 1, most likely doesn't win year 2, but I've done that with this strategy, but then wins multiple championships from years 3 and beyond, ideally all of them. And TJ and I have built far more of these super teams than not. If you look at our portfolio of dynasty teams, you see way more super teams that have won within the past 2 years than non-super teams. Nearly all competitive teams. I don't know that we have a single team not likely to make the playoffs this year or didn't make the playoffs last year. And so this strategy, I stole it from TJ, and TJ didn't get it from Warren Buffett, but I can't help but think of Warren Buffett with this strategy. Warren Buffett says with owning stocks, his ideal holding period is indefinitely. And that's sort of how I treat players in Dynasty. He says that his entire edge in the stock market is that he's thinking 15 years down the road, while everyone else is buying and selling thinking 1 year down the road. Honestly, more often than not, just thinking towards the next earnings report. And again, I think that's where the edge in Dynasty is. There's less competition in thinking 5 years down the road. Everyone else is building to win year 1, year 2, year 3. Most people don't think beyond year 4. I'm trying to build a juggernaut that lasts forever. And there's minimal competition in my startup draft for players thinking about year 4. It's all, again, within that first 3-year window. And so in economics, there's the notion of time preference, which is basically just that $1 today is worth more than $1 5 years from now, worth more than $1 tomorrow. That's basically just what interest rate is. It's just the cost of $1 today versus the cost of $1 at a later date. And in the vast majority of my leagues, there's a high interest rate. There's more people thinking along the lines of a Jacob Rickroad than along the lines of a TJ or a Warren Buffett or me. And so that's where I typically see the edge in my startup drafts. And because there's less competition, that's where all of the value is. As Warren Buffett would say, in the opposite direction of the herd is exactly where you should be going. It's to go contrarian. It's to go more long-term. And so my preferred strategy, I call it the tank and bank, or the tank then bank. Really, I just stole this from Ryan McDowell. I didn't realize it, but he calls it productive struggle. His article predated mine by like 6 years. So shout out to Ryan McDowell, but basically that's the right approach. Productive struggle, tank then bank. And here's what I mean when I say Dynasty is so much easier to game, so much easier to win than redraft. Here's what I'm doing in my startup drafts. But first, a quick little ad break. In my startup draft, I am usually trying to trade down as much as possible. Usually, that's where the value is. I'm trying to acquire extra startup capital, extra rookie picks, and win every one of these trade downs. Contrary to Jacob Rickroad, I think round 1 rookie picks are massively underrated in value. In his defense, the bust rates he was looking at back then were much higher than they are now for whatever reason. Rookie picks are also a universal currency. I don't remember who coined that term, but it's a great one, where like you have Zay Flowers, right? There are going to be people who don't like Zay Flowers or don't need a wide receiver, but that isn't the case with rookie picks, which also, by the way, don't really depreciate over time. Whereas like players can depreciate wildly week to week. Like what if Zay Flowers suffers an ACL injury? Your future round 1 rookie pick cannot suffer an ACL injury. And if you hit on a rookie pick, like let's say you draft Justin Jefferson, well, guess what? 6 months later, he dramatically reshapes your team. You immediately have a top 5 overall player in Dynasty. There's massive upside there. I'll dive into trade downs in your startup a little bit later, but that is really one of my top priorities in any startup draft. On top of that, I'm trying to game the league settings. In Dynasty, there's a reward for being the worst team in your league. I think it's better to finish dead last in year 1 because there's a reward for that. You're drafting basically next year's version of Marvin Harrison Jr. You're incentivized to finish dead last. So I like to intentionally punt year 1 and then become competitive. So let's say this is a 1 QB league, which is easier to game. I would trade down as much as possible. I would go young as much as possible. I would hoard as many rookie picks as I could. And then the best quarterback I would draft would probably be like a Trey Lance, a backup, right? Who I'm not counting on to be a starter. Why? Because I'm trying to finish dead last. The best RB2 or tight end 1 I draft in a non-tight end premium league is someone similar, some like a Trey Lance caliber tight end or running back, because then I finished dead last year 1, which guess what? I was never competing to win year 1. It's hard to compete with a team who's taking the Jacob Rickroad strategy in year 1. So I'm just full on punting. I'm not trying to compete with them, I'm trying to compete year 2, year 3, and beyond. So ideally, I land the 101. I land next year's version of Marvin Harrison Jr. And then year 2, I trade some draft capital away for a solid QB1, RB2, or tight end 1, whichever position I went weak at, sometimes multiple positions. And that could be like an Aaron Rodgers or a Raheem Mostert. They're insanely cheap in a dynasty league because they're old, they're written off as dead. Or I could trade, if I had the capital, for a solid starter. You have that universal currency with multiple rookie picks. And then I just dominate from there. And my team would continue to get better in time. With this strategy, you get better year after year after year. In the startup, you draft a bunch of young guys. Hey, guess what? The grown experience year after year, they're getting better. A wide receiver's peak year is year 4, year 5. And then you have the rookie picks. So you have a surplus of rookie picks in year 2, year 3. And your team's just growing and getting better. I've done this approach. There are leagues where I've won year 1, even though I tried to punt. I just drafted too good. Plenty of leagues where I've won year 2, and then even more leagues where I've won year 3, and then multiple years in a row. Done this many times. It's a great success. This is what I do, or at least try to do in the vast majority of my leagues. But here's the caveat. Every league is different. Most leagues have a high interest rate, high time preference, but some leagues don't. And when they don't, I am quick to change my strategy. I go where the value is. In some leagues, I'll go win now. Curtis Patrick, he has this league, the Black Crown League. And I finished top 2 in that league in 3 of 4 seasons. I went egregiously win now, but we're in year 5 and my team is still really solid. Interestingly, the uber low time preference that all these managers had in year 1 in the startup, which is why I went win now, because that's where the value was. It maintained true. They still to this day have a very low, inordinately low time preference. And so every year it's the rookie draft. And I find a way to trade my 111, 211, 311, 411 for some legit veterans who can start for me and put up points. And so I'm still, I expected my team to just totally suck year 3, year 4, but it still maintains competitive in year 5. You really want to go where the value is. And so my preferred strategy, again, tank then bank. That really only works when that's where the value is. In most of my drafts, and maybe I'm biased because these are primarily expert league drafts, that's where the value is going the tank then bank route. But the true optimal draft strategy is going where the value is, and to do it with conviction, to go all the way, no half measures. I'm a Giants fan. I said these should be tanking 8 years ago. Eli Manning was still the quarterback when I said this team should be tanking, and he never fully committed to a tank. And what happened? Dreadfully middle of the pack, no chance of winning their championship, which is the goal in Dynasty, which is the goal in the NFL. And then they were bad, and then they were really bad, and now they're horrible. So you don't want that. No half measures in fantasy football. Pick a route, go win later, win now. but do it with conviction and go all the way. That's the key. Next, I want to talk about working your league mates, the importance of trades. But first, another word from our sponsors. So, how do you know where the value is? This is one of the most important strategy tips. You need to be insanely active all throughout your startup draft. And then also in the offseason, and then also in your rookie draft. And this is like one of the reasons why Dynasty is so much more fun than redraft, at least in my experience, is the trash talk is better. People are more into it. They're more engaged. You get way more trade offers. I guess it's because there's like no real competition for Dynasty in March and April and May. That's when we all come together. That's when we all talk. We all BS. We spam out trade offers. But you need to do that. You need to do that perhaps more than anyone else in your league. In the startup, before the draft even takes place, you want to talk to your league mates. Hey, do you have any idea who you're going to take? Hey, are you trying to trade up or trade down? And then when you're on the clock, I would do a price check every pick you make before selecting a player. Anyone trying to move up here, anyone trying to move down. And then as the draft moves along, it becomes more obvious where teams stand and what you can do. Leagues, by the way, without a lot of trades are the worst. I would just be more intentional about selecting what leagues you're going to enter or who you're inviting into a league. But for the most part, Dynasty, from what I've seen, is way more active. Owners are way more engaged than redraft. And then in the offseason, you want to be working the phones. You want to know positional needs, players on a team's roster, they're down to move, testing different owners to see where the value is. And you want to be building rapport. You want a reputation of being easy to deal with. Remember, ideally, these leagues last for forever. You want a reputation of being easy to deal with. You want them to like you. You want them to do a price check with you every time they get an offer from a different owner. You want to be the person they think of when they need a position or need to tear down their roster. I do that in one of my leagues, the Lemon League. There's one guy who every time I reach out, I'll send out an offer. He'll send out a counter that's like always exactly what I need and fair. And it's like, I could send a counter here and like quibble and try and get more value, but this is just so easy. Let me just get it done. And it's like always the case with this guy. So anytime I'm trying to make a trade with this in this league, I reach out to that guy first. Don't ever get insulted by a bad trade offer ever. You need to be above that for strategic reasons. Again, all this is culminating in one key point here, and that's that trades are huge in Dynasty. Remember, otherwise you're stuck with these players forever. So Dynasty leagues, way more trades than redraft leagues, and trading is so important. Trading is so plus EV. Trading really might be the biggest edge in Dynasty. So the co-manager in a lot of my teams, just because I was sick of competing against him, I was, all right, let's just join forces here, make this easier on myself. And like his biggest edge is he is the best trader in the world. And it's because he's, at least ideally, but like as far as I can tell, always making plus EV trades. But I think that's something inherent to trading. I think trading just might be inherently plus EV, plus a positive expected value is what that means. Where ideally you're buying a player you're high on from a team who is low on that player. So you're getting good value, or you're shoring up a position of need by selling a position you're deep at. Adam Harstad has a great quote, which is, if you're winning every trade you make, guess what? You're not trading anywhere near as much. And I really think that's true. I think in general, most people aren't trading nearly as much as they should. You should worry about value. You should worry. You don't want to be losing trades. I'll tell you, every trade calculator from any site I've ever seen sucks. We're going to have to build one that's way better than that. But like every trade offer I've gotten and was insulted by was followed up by like, oh, but the trade calculator said it was fair. Do worry about value. Look at Dynasty ADP, but we're going to have Dynasty ADP up on the site very soon. Look at our Dynasty rankings, probably honestly your best go-to to see how fair an offer is. You don't want to be losing value, but I also wouldn't stress it too much if it's a player you like and it seems fair to you. So here's a small tip, is to start low in negotiations. This is just like where you're like moving the middle ground more in your favor. If you start you start off way more in your favor. And so if someone gets offended by that, just be like, hey, oh, sorry. I was just letting you know I had interest in these guys and was hoping you can get it to a point where it was more fair, but sorry for being lazy. Something like that. Like, you can smooth it over if someone really gets offended. But for the general part, when I'm like spanning out trade offers, I start low and like, I don't know, 10% of the time that gets accepted. And I'm like, oh, sweet. I just really won this trade. And other times, there's a negotiation where it moves more in their favor, but again, the middle ground is more in my favor because I started off low. But here's the single, like, maybe this is the most important thing in a dynasty league. And that's that nothing upsets the competitive balance in a league like a trade happy idiot. So your number one goal in every league, maybe the most important thing, is to find the biggest dummy in the room, ideally before anyone else, and then loot the coffers until there's nothing left. I've just seen this so many times in so many leagues, where it's like expert league, all these guys are really smart. There's one idiot who just destroys the competitive balance of the league within 24 hours, just makes a series of trades. And maybe they were with me, or maybe I was asleep at the wheel. I was on vacations, and Curtis gets it, TJ gets it, and now I'm behind the 8 ball. And the league has barely started, and they just are going to have a way better team than me. You see a guy making some really dumb trades, make sure you start spamming offers to him. See if you can pick up the scraps that are left over. It just happens. And this is just like a reality of what you're dealing with in fantasy football, not just dynasty fantasy football. Again, I said loot the coffers until there's nothing left. I think TJ Calkins would push back on that a little bit, just by saying, well, you can shear a sheep many times, but you can skin them only once. But I don't know. I've just, so many times I've seen the competitive balance in a league just immediately ruined by one owner making a series of terrible trades within the span of a few days. But you can kind of hedge yourself by making sure you're inviting the right people to the league. But this is something I look at every time I join a league. So again, be on the lookout for bad trades and reaching out to the players making those trades. Sometimes there's more than one dummy, or there's like a smart player who just has the value off on maybe one player on their roster. For instance, there's like a guy in one of my leagues who is really smart. He's won literally millions of dollars playing fantasy football, but he just severely underrates the value of rookie picks. So like every year, he always trades his next year's rookie pick as soon as available. And so like whenever his next year's rookie pick becomes available, we all just like immediately go to him to try and trade our older vets for his rookie picks. Or there's another guy who is really smart, but always overpays for his guys, where like if you have one of his guys on your roster, jackpot, you're guaranteed to win this trade. And so it's really important to know your league mates' tendencies. Like in the DFB Invitational, invited Evan Silva. I know Evan Silva likes to go win now, and I know I like to acquire rookie picks. So of course, trying to buy his rookie picks as soon as possible before anyone else gets them. Know your league mates' tendencies. You want to be winning these trades like I just described. You don't want your opponents winning these trades, getting Evan Silva's rookie picks, or getting, that one manager's his guys, or the other manager who underrates rookie picks. You want that to be you. So always be someone they think of, be easy to work with, be likable, and to be in constant communication. I'll be honest, my health suffers a little bit during startups. It's just a lot of work, but it's so much fun. Like I love it. If you're as competitive as I am, it's probably going to be fun for you as well. And so I talked about it before, but trading down is such a massive edge in startup drafts. That's historically, it might not be true in your draft, but it's historically true in my drafts. And why is that the case? Why is trading down in a startup so much of an edge? Again, it's probably because of time preference. Players are anxious. They can't wait for their turn. They're worried they're going to get sniped. Maybe it's hubris or arrogance. They think they can outdraft everyone else. That's historically where the value is trading down. And so that's what I'll typically do. I'll move down 8 spots in round 2 to pick up a free future round 1 rookie pick. And then I'll also they'll throw in a move up in round 4 to round 3, and like that's just an insane edge. You can compare, just pull up Dynasty ADP, look at the 201, look at the 212, right? The difference between those players is not worth all the value I just described. And so generally in a startup, I'm trying to trade down as much as possible, do this all throughout my draft. There are leagues where I never once made my original pick until like round 8, but then by like round 9, I have more players than anyone else, or like I have that. And then I also have, 4 extra round 1 rookie picks. And if a tier dies right in front of me, I'm not afraid to just sit on the clock for hours trying to work out a deal. Not afraid to do that. Just make sure when you're trading down, you're winning these trades. So I've gone on plenty of Dynasty podcasts. I've laid out my preferred strategy. I've talked about the importance of trading down. And I had this one guy reach out to me. He's like, "Hey, I took your trade down advice. Here's my roster. What do you think?" And it was terrible. It sucked. So just make sure you're winning these trades. And also, by the way, trade down small. Like when you're, I don't like to trade down from a round 2 to a round 5, just because you can if you trade down from a round 2 to a late round 2, you can trade down again to an early round 3 to an early round 4. So I don't like to do that. So just, it's a little bit of art and science. You might need some experience, but this is what I like to do. You can reach out to me on Twitter if you want to see some examples of some of my super teams or some of my trades I've made in startups. There's like a certain point in the startup draft where I'll just trade my startup pick straight up for a round 1 rookie pick. I forget where that is, maybe like round 8, but there is a point where I do that. So you can hit me up on Twitter if you want the specifics, but I wanted to talk about, and this is really important, how positional value changes in a dynasty league. For instance, running backs are so much more valuable in redraft than in dynasty. In dynasty league, I hate running backs. Oftentimes I'm almost literally not drafting running backs. But first, a word from our sponsors. Okay, positional value. I'm going to try not to go too deep into the weeds here. If you're looking for that, read my award-winning annual article, Anatomy of a League Winner. Just Google Scott Barrett, Fantasy Points, Anatomy of a League Winner. I'll probably do the 2024 version in a few weeks. But basically, in a 1 QB redraft league, the most important position in determining whether you win or lose your league is historically your RB1 spot in a redraft league. Why? Because running back is the scarcest position in fantasy, because highest end running backs typically score the most fantasy points, and they score the most fantasy points relative to lower end starting running backs versus high end wide receivers versus lower end starting wide receivers, if that makes sense, or if I didn't botch that. But just know that, read the article. Basically, this changes dramatically in a superflex league. Why? Because the scarcity component of the equation changes dramatically, much more in favor of quarterbacks. In a 1 quarterback league, there's 12 starting quarterbacks, right? 12 teams starting 1 quarterback. And then half the teams, let's say, have a backup. So there's 18 total quarterbacks. And then there's 14 quarterbacks who are a starting quarterback in the NFL who are not on a fantasy team. And then for running backs, it's roughly 24 starting running backs. Every team has to start 2. And then half of those teams has a running back in the flex. So there's 30, but every team wants multiple good backup running backs in case their running back gets hurt, or, they could play in the flex. But there's only 32 RB1s in the NFL. And some of those RB1s are in gross committees on bad teams. And so least scarce position, most valuable. The 0 RB argument in redraft is more along the lines of there's good value in like later round running backs because we're bad at predicting who's going to be the RB1. All this changes dramatically in a super flex league. Check out the article if you want to see my math, but basically, quarterback is king in a super flex league. 12 teams starting 2 quarterbacks, that's 24. There's only, you want a good backup. There's only 32 available starting quarterbacks in football. If it's a 1 quarterback league, I would massively devalue the position because it's not very valuable. And in fact, if deploying the tank then bank strategy, I'd full on punt the quarterback position in year 1 to try and lock up the 101 pick. That's exactly what I did in our fantasy points league. All the fantasy points writers and analysts and owners did a dynasty league. I full on punted the position, but Justin Herbert was on waivers, and then I picked him up. And you know what? I tried to do the tank then bank. Instead, I won year 1, I won year 2, I won year 3. So, but yeah, 1 QB league, devalue the position. If not, just outright punt the position. Also true in 1 QB is that they have unrivaled longevity. A running back, we typically write off as dead when they turn 28. They start to lose value when they're 24, 25. But Tom Brady, he played until he's 45. Imagine what Tom Brady was worth as a rookie in a super flex dynasty league. Like, imagine you could travel back in time and whoever had Tom Brady, which he was on waivers as a rookie, pretend a team had him. What would you trade for Tom Brady? 30 round 1 picks. Like, that legitimately might be a fair price for rookie season Tom Brady, who played till he's 45 and was putting up numbers all throughout. And so tight end is similar in a non-tight end premium league. Tight ends just really aren't that valuable. And within the tight end position, there's no middle class. It's a position wholly without a middle class. There's basically what I say a few oligarchs. That's Oligarch, oligarch. I've said this many times on podcasts and people think I'm saying Olive Garden. There's few oligarchs ruling over a high number of peasants. There's no middle class, 1 to 5 oligarchs, bunch of peasants, right? Typically, any given year, redraft. And so because that's the case, I would devalue it. They're just not that valuable in non-tight end premium. Or I'd fully punt the position. But in a tight end premium league, which again was my recommendation, you should be playing tight end premium leagues, tight ends become a lot more valuable. And this is especially true in tight end premium leagues with multiple flex spots and a large number of starters. Makes tight ends more valuable, but again, remember, it's historically a position without a middle class. So you want to pay up for the oligarchs while not overrating the middle class too much. And by the way, like, this is being recorded in 2024, the guaranteed oligarchs are now older. And so, like, I don't know that it's worth paying up for a Travis Kelce, but I just want to, like, impress upon you his value. Like, over the past 5 years, it's felt like 90% of the 30 tight end premium dynasty leagues I'm in, the league winner was someone who had a top 3 tight end. So probably Travis Kelce, maybe Mark Andrews, maybe Darren Waller across that 2-week stretch, maybe Sam Laporta last year or Trey McBride. But, it really just depends on where the prices are, what the cost associated is. Every draft is its own unique special snowflake. And like, you have to look, we're talking in a vacuum and nothing exists inside a vacuum. And so with that in mind, in the vast majority of my leagues, tight ends in tight end premium leagues are generally cheaper than they otherwise should be. And it's kind of hard for me to press upon you, like, how to know when it's time to draft a tight end. I would just say a good litmus test is sort of to look at, MFL has this or FFPC has this. Just look at last season's fantasy points per game or the previous season's fantasy points per game and contrast that with the available wide receivers. And more often than not, you'll see that tight ends are typically a value. But a quick little caveat here is it might make sense to fade rookie tight ends, like in your rookie draft, just not draft rookie tight ends. Just because like one of the most potent cheat codes in fantasy over the last like 10 plus years has been to just punt rookie tight ends and then like auto draft sophomore tight ends, or in a dynasty league, try to buy low on a sophomore tight end. Last year was unique in that it was like an atypically good year for rookie tight ends. But even then, like you saw a sophomore Trey McBride was basically super free. And then, you could buy him for basically nothing and then exploded onto the scene. Also, just like keep in mind, like a Rob Gronkowski is actually like less valuable in a tight end premium because he was more touchdown reliant than reception reliant. So just make sure you're keeping that in mind. Whereas like a Mark Andrews is more valuable because or TJ Hawkinson is better, like more of a target hog. So just keep that in mind too. But again, my recommendation is tight end premium. And I do tend to load up on tight ends more than not, but really just go where the value is. In a one QB league, wide receivers are king and nothing comes close. And then in Superflex, it's QBs and wide receivers. I want to be loading up on those two positions. Way better longevity than running backs, far less risk, far less volatility, comparable points scored. And so an ideal dynasty Superflex draft for me is just off of positional value, ignoring the players, is just like I draft a QB round 1, I draft a QB round 2, and then I draft 7 wide receivers in a row, and then I draft a QB round 8 or whatever it is. That's typically what I do. Like that's kind of just looking at the positional value. Now let's get into the running back position, which I have a lot of thoughts on, but first, a quick little ad read. So again, remember, running backs are the most valuable position in redraft historically. I legitimately hate running backs in Dynasty. I hate them. I hate their guts. There are leagues where I legitimately don't draft a running back until round 28. It's not typically the case. Typically, I would say until round 14, which is still super late compared to I'm just about always the last team in a startup to draft a running back. Because again, remember, I'm doing tank then bank. That's my strategy. And why am I doing this? It's because running backs have the shortest lifespan and they possess a ton of risk. They have the most injury risk in comparison to any other position, but I'm not just talking about that. The running back position is the one most closely tethered to usage and volume. You see this in my articles. You see this in Ryan Heath's articles. Is just, weighted opportunity is king, XFP is king. With running backs, you're just chasing snaps or XFP or weighted opportunity. Whereas with wide receiver, quarterback, it's way more just efficiency, talent in comparison to running backs. That's all well and true. But running back tethered to usage and volume, what does that mean? It means just one little change can really just one little variable tweak and just really nuke a running back's value. Their value can just totally plummet. Let's say you had an Isaiah Pacheco on your team. He's RB12 in startup drafts right now, but what would his price be if Kansas City drafted Jonathan Brooks? What would it be if they signed Derrick Henry in free agency? And so every running back you ever draft in a startup has to navigate free agency, has to successfully maneuver through the draft to maintain their projected volume, projected usage. And every year you don't win the ship is a year your running back is older and nearing the age cliff. They're depreciating in value. And so what I do is I more or less full on punt the position, tank then bank. That's my strategy. Full on punt the position unless we're talking about a rookie draft. That's when I want to be acquiring running backs. When they're at their youngest. Highly drafted rookie running backs are typically far more productive as rookies than any other position. They hit their peaks in year 2. But keep in mind, I'm really only trying to draft bell cows or running backs with bell cow potential. Why? Again, this has to do with scarcity. We're talking about a best ball league, which we'll get into, by the way. It's entirely different. But in a dynasty league, I want highest end running backs without that risk of, being supplanted via the draft or via the free agency. And they score the most points because they're involved in the passing game and in the running game, high percent of the snaps, score the most points. So that's what I want. After about, even if I'm fully punting the position, after about round 13, I'll start loading up on running backs with upside Like I might not draft a single running back rounds 1 through 12, but then rounds 13 and on is like, oh, Audric Estime. I think he can lead Denver in carries this year. Tyrone Tracy, I love his bell cow potential. I don't hold Devin Singletary in high regard, but I'm not spending high-end draft capital on a running back. There's like a few exceptions here, but I'm almost never not. One exception I'll say is I draft the fuck out of Breece Hall. I love me some Breece Hall. Why? Because of scarcity. Because he's a bell cow back. And there's maybe only 2 to 4 bell cows left in today's NFL. Maybe Bijan Robinson, maybe Jonathan Taylor. But like if there's only 2 this year, it wouldn't shock me. It would be Breece Hall and Christian McCaffrey, who, by the way, is past the age cliff, but I don't know. Hall of Fame running backs age more gracefully than not non-Hall of Fame running backs. So he's still the 101 in redraft. But yeah, so Breece Hall I would make an exception for, but he might be the only one legitimately. And just remember, for this tank then bank method to work, it's really important to tailor all of this to your league settings. So I was in a super flex tight end premium startup draft a few years ago. You only needed to draft 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end, and there were 8 flex spots, 1 super flex spot. You probably guessed I would punt running back, which is right. But what you might not have guessed is, well, I noticed there were 13 starting spots in this lineup, which is a lot. Most leagues are like 10. So immediately right there, I prioritized depth. I knew all of my league mates would be used to the 9 to 10 starting spots. So they would underrate it relative to the leagues they typically play in. And that's exactly what I did. Full on punted running back. I knew that tight ends became more valuable in comparison to typical leagues, because most leagues are start 2 or start 3. In this league, it's start 1, which is the same as tight end. So tight ends become a little more valuable. And so after a certain point in the draft, or actually pretty early on, I drafted more on the player rather than the position, outside of knowing in a super flex quarterback is the most scarce, most valuable, and knowing that running back just super devalue it. And what happened was I immediately had a top 3 team in the league, despite not owning a single viable running back and having a super shaky QB2 at the time. I think what happened was my QB2 got hurt and my QB3 was just like fine, like a starter, but who is like bottom 5 starter. And so what did I do? Around midseason, I looked at the bottom 4 teams. These were teams who, some of which like went win now, and now their team is just sucks ass. Oh, okay. Looks like I have to start the rebuild way early. I know this team stinks. So I reached out to those teams. I bought a high-end running back for cheaper than he should have been, because again, your time preference changes when your team stinks and you maybe only have 1 good running back and 1 good wide receiver. So I bought my running back for cheap. Maybe I bought another viable starting running back for extremely cheap, like a Raheem Mostert, who he finished top 3 in fantasy points per game last year, and he's basically free in Dynasty because he's old and injury prone. And then I upgraded the QB2. And what did I do? I finished first in this league in points scored in every year of its existence. And like that's the power of customizing your strategy to your league settings. This is something you want to be doing in every one of your leagues. You want to customize and tailor your strategy to both your opponents. Remember, if all your opponents are going win now, you want to go win later, and vice versa. But also customizing your strategy to your league settings. But what about best ball dynasty leagues? And so I'll just say I hate dynasty best ball leagues. I win all of them. I just hate them because they're less fun. They're just like way too easy to game. Just like it's too easy, So, but basically the fundamental difference is just that people massively underrate the importance of depth in best ball leagues. And so what do? You can probably guess. I trade down as much as possible in the startup draft while winning those trades. I try to acquire as many rookie picks as I can. Remember those that's free extra players. And so like let's say I'm trading down from the 108 to the 110 and I pick up a round 2, a round 3 and a round 4. That's 3 extra players. And like depth is so important in best ball. In a redraft league where you have the safety net of the waiver wire to fall back on, high-end starters are all that matters. Check out my article, which I refer to as my magnum opus. I'm not saying it's the best article ever written. I'm just saying it's the best article or the most important article I've ever written. Upside Wins Championships 2021 Redux. I wrote this in 2021 and haven't updated it, but Upside Wins Championships is just that upside is more valuable than downside is detrimental. You just want highest end performers, in part because you have the safety net of the waiver wire to fall back on, which you don't really have in Dynasty, especially in deep Dynasty, is the waiver wire is typically more barren. And in best ball, you don't have it at all. And volatility in redraft is a negative. Let's say a guy finishes as the wide receiver 18. He scores 25 fantasy points 5 times, and he scores 5 fantasy points the rest of the time, and it's just totally random when those happen. That might not be a player you start ever. You might not even start him in the right weeks because volatility is tough. But in best ball, volatility is a good thing where it just automatically starts the highest scoring player each week, and you don't get penalized for the negative weeks if you have enough depth. Again, with depth more important, high-end producers a little less valuable. I'll say high-end starters still matter. They just matter less. And I always think back to 2020. In the year 2020, Aaron Jones finished as the RB3 in PPR. Nyheim Hines and JD McKissick finished as the RB23 and the RB24. But in the best ball format, where you just take the higher score each week and drop the lower score, Hines and McKissick outscored Aaron Jones, the RB3. That's an extreme example. I don't know that we're ever going to see something like that again, where maybe we just got lucky with this use case scenario with non-overlapping spike weeks. But that should get the point across, is that you can cobble together like high-end production, like Aaron Jones level production with good depth. And again, like high-end production still matters a great deal because like, prime Travis Kelce, that's rare production. You're not going to get that from anyone else or any 2 players combined, or Justin Jefferson or Tyreek Hill. They're spike weeks. You're just not going to see that anywhere else. It just matters less. It just matters less relative to depth, or at least matters less relative to then what your league mates think it does. Those are my thoughts on a best ball league. One last word from our sponsors before we dive into closing thoughts. I have this on my show sheet, which is the importance of the waiver wire. I'm just like, I typically outsource this in my own leagues. The only thing I'll say is just be active and to aim and shoot for upside, or for at least for players you think you can turn a quick profit on, like, Joe Flacco at the tail end of last season. I think one of my quarterbacks got hurt and I paid a round 3 pick for Joe Flacco, but guess what? He won me a championship. So, but that guy, picked him up for $12 a fab because he was just quicker than everyone else. And then if you draft like I do with a pre-draft rookie draft, it might be worth trying to buy some extra fab a few weeks before the NFL draft, because you never know. There might be, like Terry McLaurin, right? When earlier than anyone expected, and he wasn't drafted in almost any of my pre-draft rookie drafts. Outside of that, I just like some caveats and risks to be mindful of. And I don't have the answers here, things to think of. So again, I love the tank then bank strategy. This doesn't work if your league is going to fold in 5 years, in 3 years. And unfortunately, like a large number of dynasty leagues can fold within 3 years, within 5 years. And so one, that's why I recommend FFPC. Use promo code points. Their leagues don't fold. just about ever. So again, really recommend them as a trusted name if you're looking to get into Dynasty Fantasy Football. Or you can do what I do in my own leagues. I typically house these on myfantasyleague.com, but basically I'm the commissioner. I make, I handpick the people entering into the league with where I know they're going to be active. I know they're going to care. I know they're not going to bail. And I make them pay the buy-in for the first 3, sometimes 5 years. And so just like you're so disincentivized to bail. And if you need to be replaced, it's easy to replace you because you have multiple years paid up for. And also, if I'm the commissioner and my team is a juggernaut, then yeah, I'm just going to replace you. I'm just going to keep finding replacements because I'm trying to keep this revenue stream open for as long as possible. The other like big concern with a dynasty league to be mindful of, what I talked about when I brought up like Curtis winning the league in round 1, is just there's a huge edge to whoever owns the 101 in a dynasty league. Third round reversal helps a little bit, but not a lot. There's a few things you could do here, a few things I've done. You can make it a competition. If you're going to do a startup, do it after the NCAA tournament and you make everyone fill out a bracket, and then whoever has the best bracket drafts 101, second best 102, etc. That's an idea where at least there's like a skill component involved. You could also make it cost extra as part of the buy-in where you like have to bid on it. Like I've never done this, but I like that idea where it's like, oh, you want the 101? It's like, okay, well, blind bidding against all your league mates. And like legitimately, like let's say you $100 buy-in, the 101 is probably worth an extra $100. Just like that's how much of an advantage it is to have either a Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, or to have that pick and be able to trade down. What I typically do in my leagues, I think this works like pretty well, is I do like a randomized order, and then whoever has number 1 gets to pick their spot in the startup, but note that the spot in the startup is opposite their spot in the rookie draft. So in the same year you do, most other people do have rookies in their startup draft. I don't. I keep them separate to like navigate this 101 issue. So you get to pick in the startup. You can draft the 101, but that means you have the 112 in the rookie draft, which means, oh, I can get Caleb Williams or I can get Marvin Harrison Jr. Give me the 101 in the rookie draft. Okay, but that means you get the 112 in the startup draft and there's no third round reversal. I think that's the fairest way to go about it. That's typically what I do, but still huge edge to whoever got that randomized first pick where they can either get Caleb Williams or Josh Allen, whatever. So those are the different ways I think about it. I really don't have a perfect solution here, but again, those are some concerns you need to think about. Nothing worse than going tank then bank and then the league folding because the rage quitted because your team is too much of a juggernaut, or, getting the 112 in your own league. So this, folks, was my best attempt at a masterclass on how to dominate dynasty leagues. I hope you enjoyed this. If you didn't, you can yell at me on Twitter. You can, if you have any questions or thoughts, you can reach out to me on Twitter, because guess what? We're going to have a follow-up to this. Yeah, any questions, any thoughts, any criticisms, any critiques, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or in Discord. I'm on Twitter at Scott Barrett DFB. As closing thoughts, if there's any time, this show is also sponsored by FantasyPoints.com. In addition to FFPC, promo code points. Yeah, sorry I couldn't turn this into an article. I just don't have a ton of time because I have to do anatomy of a league winner. I have to do my draft guide. I have to do 69 stats. And I'm doing a bunch of CEO stuff. What does that entail? It just means we have a ton of really cool, sick shit coming soon. Fantasy Points League Importer is going to be incredible. We've put a ton of money and time into it. The Fantasy Points Generator is going to be incredible. We've put a ton of time and money into it. That's really been like The only two complaints we've heard from subs this past year is just that it could be better. Well, guess what? It's going to be insane. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be so cool. And then the Fantasy Points data suite. Again, like our closest competitor for this charges $15,000 a year. This is $200 a year. And we are adding so many cool things to this. We're adding player pages. We're adding infographics. We're adding new tools, many, many, many new tools, new stats. And I don't want to give away too much, but there's one thing everyone is asking for. There's one thing I've been talking about for 6 years where I said, if someone just invented this stat, this would be the GOAT wide receiver stat. And like literally you would just rank wide receivers by this. And I'm pretty sure we're going to have it by August. So be on the lookout for that. FantasyPoints.com, GOAT site, GOAT analysts, read Ryan Heath, who just like randomly out of nowhere became the best fantasy writer ever. Yeah, shout out to us. Shout out to FantasyPoints.com. Subscribe, get an all-in package where you get a discounted rate on our premium sub, our data sub. Well, thanks for listening. Again, hit me up. Any comments, questions? Yeah. Also, 5-star review on School of Scott. This is going to be a must listen. So make sure you follow, like, subscribe. I don't know what the next show is going to be. It's going to be good. I know that. So, well, thanks for listening, guys.